Joined by Otto Reich, the former American ambassador to Venezuela and former Assistant Secretary of State for Western Hemisphere Affairs. Otto, you know whereof you speak. Thanks for Skyping in from Washington. And give us your take on this relaxation of travel and trade regulations with Cuba.
Well, thank you very much, JD. I'm happy to talk about this because it is something that I've been following for quite a long time. I think in the interest of full disclosure, I should tell your audience that I was born in Cuba just a few years ago, and I've been following the developments on the island for a long time. I think that the measures announced by President Obama last month, I think suffer from the same problems, a lot of the same problems that this president's policy initiatives across the board suffer from, is that they tend to be negotiated in the dark. The Congress of the United States was kept completely in the dark about these negotiations with Castro. The Cuban-American community was kept in the dark. Imagine, for example, if President Obama were negotiating an agreement with Hezbollah and not informed the Israeli government or the U.S. representatives that are interested in the sovereignty and security of Israel. This is basically what the president did with relation to Cuba.
And since you were born in Cuba, Otto, I'm interested not only in the scholarship involved as you've taken a look at what's going on here and the politics of it, but personally for you, when you see that we're now moving in this direction with the Castros still in power there, what does it mean to you personally, Otto?
Well, it's quite frustrating, actually, because the Castro regime is on the ropes. It has depended on foreign giveaways, frankly. You can't even call it foreign aid. Giveaways first from the Soviet Union from 1960 until 1990, when the Soviet Union disappeared. The Soviets were giving Castro $5 billion a year, which may not sound like much if you hear our budget debates on Capitol Hill, but at that time, it was equivalent to 25% of the gross domestic product of Cuba. When the Soviet Union disappeared, not long thereafter, Hugo Chavez came to power in Venezuela, a leftist, and he took up where the Soviets had left off. The estimates are that the amount of money that Chavez gave to Castro was about twice, in real dollars, what the Soviets had given to Castro. Chavez died, and Venezuela is now in bankruptcy. There could very well be a collapse of the Venezuelan economy in the next few weeks. And for the President of the United States, President Obama, to throw a lifeline to this hostile regime headed by two octogenarians, the Castro brothers, that have killed Americans, that have undermined our interests all over the world, not just in Latin America, but in Africa, the Middle East, that have sent Cuban torture experts to Vietnam to torture American pilots. And this is in John McCain's book, for example. I'm just not inventing it. For the president to do this at this time shows a very poor, let's just be charitable, a poor lack of judgment on the president's part.
Otto, 30 seconds on the loosening of these restrictions. Is in any way, will this help the Cuban people?
No, and this is the irony. You heard Josh Earnest, so the White House spokesperson, say that this is going to put pressure on the Cuban government. How do tourists put pressure on any government? Name me one country that has been liberated by tourists, for example. The Cuban government receives today about 2 million tourists a year from Canada, Europe, Latin America. There's been no advancement in human rights and civil liberties.
And that is what is so disturbing. No advancement in human rights and civil liberties for the people of Cuba. Otto, we're going to ask you to stay with us. When we come back, we'll focus more on Venezuela. There's more to come here on America's Forum. Continue the conversation with Otto Reich, the former U.S. ambassador to Venezuela, likewise the former Assistant Secretary of State for Western Hemisphere Affairs. Otto, again, we appreciate your time, and you touched on this briefly before the break. The situation in Venezuela. It's beyond depression. It is dire, is it not?
It is. It's amazing that a country as rich as Venezuela, with the largest, allegedly the largest deposits of oil in the world, is next to bankruptcy, very close to bankruptcy. They don't have enough money to import food. There are food riots now all over the country. There's scarcities of practically everything. Everybody knows about the scarcities of toilet paper because they became the object of a lot of ridicule when they were reported. But everything is missing in Venezuela, and it's due to one thing, that Hugo Chavez imposed a socialist economy on Venezuela, and it has bankrupted the country.
And you mentioned earlier the money that Chavez was giving the Castros in Cuba. Did that also contribute to the problems?
Absolutely. JD, the IMF estimates that in the 15 years that the Chavez and now the Maduro government, his successor, has been in power, that Venezuela has had an income of over $1 trillion, 1,000,000 times $1 million. That 40%, over 40% of that is missing. About $430 billion has gone missing. Some of that was just plainly given by Chavez to a lot of his friends inside Venezuela and also in the international socialist community, countries like Cuba, Ecuador, Bolivia, Nicaragua, and others.
Wow. On one hand, it sounds like a kleptocracy. You think that money gets squirreled away in private accounts, and yet there was that activism with a kind of Venezuelan foreign aid, and the people of Venezuela suffer. Because of that, and because of the oil, and because of the climate, and because of where this nation sits geopolitically, Otto, I understand that Venezuela has gone a courting, gone to some nations that may have interests that are not shared by the United States. For example, three come to mind: Russia, China, and Iran. We've got about 3 minutes. Of those three nations, which is most involved in Venezuela these days?
Well, of those three nations, China, Russia, and Iran, the only one that is not having the same economic difficulties as Venezuela is China. And Nicolas Maduro, the president of Venezuela, just came back from a world tour. He visited a lot of countries, not only those three, but a lot of others, particularly oil-producing countries, to see if they could help raise the price of oil. Obviously, they don't understand very much about supply and demand. But the only country that was in a position to help them financially was China. And the reports, very credible reports, are that Maduro came back empty-handed. The Chinese manage, as you know, their economy almost like a capitalist country. And they're not about to invest more money in Venezuela when they see that it's either stolen or it's just thrown away by the current government.
Now, that's interesting, and we have about 2 minutes remaining, because for the past several years, the Chinese have been trying to get a foothold in Central America, in the Western Hemisphere, but they're saying no to Venezuela.
Well, they're saying no to Venezuela because they already invested over $60 billion, and they have in Venezuela. They have very little to show for it. Mostly it was in advanced purchases of oil. And the Venezuelan government has been so incompetent that oil production is down by 40%. And Venezuela has sold a lot of its production in advance in order to come up with cash to import food. They don't even have enough cash now, as I said earlier, to import food. And the Chinese know very well what the Venezuelan economic situation is, and they're not about to invest any more money in there.
Otto, in the minute that remains, we heard a lot of talk during my days in Congress that Hugo Chavez was working with the Iranians, that there were plane loads of Iranians coming from Tehran to Caracas weekly. Is that still a close relationship with Iran?
It's a close relationship with Iran. Nicolas Maduro, the president, the successor to Chavez, just came back from Iran. But fortunately for us, fortunately for the United States, the Iranian government is not in a position to help Venezuela because they are also heavily dependent on oil. And thanks to American creativity and our free market system and the production of oil through fracking, countries like Russia, Iran, and Venezuela are not in a position to help one another.
Well, on that optimistic note geopolitically, Ambassador Otto Reich, we always appreciate your insights. You know the area, and you share that knowledge with us. For that, we are very grateful. Good to have you, sir.
Appreciate it.
And when we come back, did the Pope take a page from our friend Bill Donahue? We'll talk to Bill Donahue next on America's Forum.